Conservatives are targeting voters with low literacy skills in an effort to keep them from accessing the ballot. The folks at ProPublica, in partnership with Great TV, published a deep dive into the relationship between literacy and voter turnout. Aliyya Swaby, one of the reporters who wrote the piece, joins us now from Atlanta. Aliyya, glad to have you on the show. We hear historically about by literacy tests and how those were eventually outlawed by the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But break down your reporting in terms of how Republicans are trying to use sophisticated efforts, again, to target voters who are not strong with their literacy skills, and they're really targeting poor people, especially poor Black people.
Right. Yes, you're exactly right with that. I mean, we've looked into the archives, we've looked into the history of this kind of suppression, and it's not so much that it's come back, but it's more that it never went away. You have, conservatives in the 60s talking about voter fraud as a reason why they need to make it harder to vote, the reason why they need to put literacy tests in place in the 60s, and you still see that as a reasoning for adding barriers for certain people. Some of the laws that have been passed in 2021 have made it harder for people to assist voters with lower literacy skills. And again, you just see that kind of mirrored throughout history.
Again, we see how they have attacked folks in Georgia and Texas and other places. And what we also are seeing how they're trying to now challenge thousands of people who've already registered to throw them off the polls, because they know if you can knock out 4, 5, 10,000 folks, that's the margin of victory.
Right. So there are some states that have put in place what are called exact match or perfect match laws, which means if you accidentally spell your name wrong, if you make, a very simple error, that's not because you are trying to mislead people about your identity, but because maybe you struggle to read. So maybe you read current date and instead you put your birthday, for example. That's a sign that someone may not have understood the instructions. But in some states, that's reason to throw out their vote altogether. And so it's laws like that that are, again, those barriers that mean that it might not be, specifically saying if you can't read, you can't vote. But in effect, that is what those laws are doing.
I want to bring in Representative Renita Shannon here because, look, you were on the front lines and seeing this happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Since 2017, serving in the House of Representatives, I've been on the Governmental Affairs Committee, which deals with election law. And we saw many of these bills come through that put exact match into place. Thankfully, we don't still have that in place in Georgia today. The courts took care of that, as well as a Representative B. Wynn, who's running for Secretary of State right now. But we've also seen other things. I think the last time that people really understood what was going on in Georgia was when it was in the papers that there were bills outlawing giving people snacks and water as they stand in line and wait. That's an example of what your guest is talking about, where it's all these things just coming together to make it harder for people to vote. So whether it's giving people felonies because they are assisting people who don't read at a level that they have the full confidence that they are casting their vote for the folks that they want to cast it for. It's that sort of intimidation. It's allowing the FBI to investigate elections for absolutely no reason. It's allowing folks to just challenge an entire swap, thousands and thousands of voters, just, with no sort of evidence or due process or anything, just throwing out large challenges that, folks have to respond to. And if they don't, then their vote is not counted. And so all of this, at the root of all this, is just a consistent type of voter suppression that is meant to do one thing, and that is to make it so difficult for Black and brown voters to keep up with what it takes to vote and to toss so many hurdles at Black and brown voters that they will just give up and not vote, because it becomes a lot, right? People have got jobs to work. They've got families to raise. They do not have time to be experts of government. And with the threat of going to jail for helping your community have their voice heard at the ballot box, as well as all of these additional hurdles that change what feels like practically every year, is having a tremendous impact on making sure that every community's voice, every voter's voice is heard in the same way with equal justice.
Aliyya, the thing that, so what was in your reporting, I always talk about this wow factor. What was the one thing that just really jumped out at you and the reporting team as y'all were doing, while you were working through the story?
Yeah, I think one thing that really jumped out at us was as we were contacting voters who had been, involved in the investigation against Olivia Coley-Pearson, a woman who had helped people to vote who struggled to read. The state did an investigation, and they called up people on the phone who, their forms were not, quite filled out right, and those people really viewed that as a form of intimidation, whether or not that was the intent. That was how it was received. And there were people who said after that, this woman who helps people to vote ended up charged. And, I'm not going to vote. I'm not someone who feels like I can, I'm not a city council person. I'm definitely going to be charged for this. So it's the fact of the intimidation that comes as a result of investigations like these. That was a wow factor to me.
That is the intent, to scare those voters to say, I'm afraid to go to the polls, so therefore I don't even want to chance it. I don't want to risk it. I'm just not going to vote.
Right.
So the thing that jumps out at me, Aliyya, with your reporting, what did officials say how they can fix this, how they can try to combat this? What are groups trying to do to fight this?
Yeah, so we've talked to a lot of experts who study this, who study how voting can be made more accessible for people who struggle with reading. A lot of the things that they say are things to just simplify it that would help really all of us. A lot of us have issues with reading the very convoluted constitutional amendments or the ballot questions. Making those more simple, written in plainer language, would help people with lower literacy skills and everybody to vote. Changing the design is one of the major things that maybe you don't think about when you go into the voting booth, but the design of a ballot can really be especially challenging for people who struggle with reading. They can be laid out in ways that are very confusing. They're not sure where to go to get the instructions, where the instructions end, and the list of voters begin. So those two things are really major in terms of making the vote more accessible.
All right, then. And on Congo, it's a constant battle. And the problem that we have, this Supreme Court has frankly gutted the Voting Rights Act. And Chief Justice John Roberts, is complaining about how people are criticizing the Supreme Court. Well, he was the one who led that particular effort. And this is how we got to this particular point. And the moment they did that, Republicans pounced on that and put into place a lot of these onerous laws to do exactly what Aliyya and ProPublica and Great TV's reporting has discovered.
And this is why everybody who always says voting doesn't matter, you always have to respond with, if voting doesn't matter, why are people working so hard to prevent us from being able to vote? Period, bottom line. When I was reading this article, and thank you, Ms. Swaby, and your team for this incredible article, not even allowing people to get assistance when they're at the polls or filling out the forms. Every single step of the way, they are working to block it. And to be quite honest, Roland, this actually ties in with the last segment on Mississippi as relates to these states that are in poverty as well, because the education programs don't allow for us to have strong programs in schools as it relates to literacy. So we're talking about an endless cycle where they're not giving us the funding locally in our schools to give us the skills to become literate and the like. They're not funding the community centers that help people gain skills in terms of being able to better themselves. And then you put it in the political system, in the political process, where you can't even get to the booth and be able to get assistance because you don't have the skills to be able to read the ballots. This is a multi-pronged approach. And people think that just because folks are not wearing white sheets to try to prevent us from getting to the ballot booth, that they are not using Klan-like tactics. The fact of the matter is, when Joe Madison talks about James Crow Esquire instead of Jim Crow, this is what they are doing. They are working every single day to create laws from the most basic levels, like these perfect match laws, to even simple things like being able to hand out water, as Representative Shannon said. And so right now, coming into these midterms, we need to understand that many of us have been doing this work for years, and we understand it. Some of us are getting a little bit more sophisticated on it now. But whatever it takes, we need all hands on deck coming into this midterms. And after this midterm, we have to go harder in our community. And I know we go hard, but we got to go harder in our communities and making sure that we're demanding the resources needed to make sure that we're building a literate electorate, period, bottom line. And so they got this double-edged sword going on where they want to prevent us from voting. And then on the other side, they want to have all of these messages out there. Voting doesn't matter. Voting doesn't change anything. But we are realizing, more people are realizing now that it is now or never. And so with reporting like this getting out there, which isn't being covered by the major networks, the burden is on us. That's what onus means. It's on us to make sure that we're getting this message out and continue to fight. And so shout out to all of the activists out there. Shout out to the reporters who are doing this work. The time was yesterday to get active on this, and we got to keep going.
Aliyya, final comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. That this is something that has not been covered very widely. I think the part of that is because there's a huge stigma against not being able to read. And that's really something that is, that needs to be tackled in and of itself in order for this to be an issue that's more on people's radars and where people feel comfortable raising their hands and saying, yes, I struggle to read. Yes, these laws have been stopping me from actually being able to exercise my right.
All right, then. Again, great coverage there, Aliyya Swaby, ProPublica in partnership with Gray TV. We appreciate their reporting, that partnership. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
An angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol. We've seen shooting.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear. When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is RMartin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.